one more minute. We could do roll call, Mr. Gary.
Councilor Chow.
Here.
Councilor Dakota.
Here.
Councilor Scott.
Here.
3 present.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk, for calling the meeting to order. Today is November 19, 2024, 5:30 p.m. We're having a subcommittee meeting on rules and election law. Here with me, my committee co-councilors and committee member, Councilor Dakota, Councilor Scott. I also like to welcome Councilor Gitchias, also in the chamber, and all in the chamber also is the city solicitor, who will explain to us the process, some of the laws, the consent decree that we are dealt with. Before I open up to the solicitor, any of my colleagues have any comments or questions before we start? Thank you for that. Mr. Solicitor, thank you for being here. This meeting is a result of motion from Councilor Gitchie and Councilor Robertson, also from the prior term, Councilor Scott. And it really is a concern by all the council members as to the steps in the process, what can be done, what can't be done. I think what's in the midst of all this is the consent decree, which we are operating under right now as a hybrid council system that has been adopted a couple of years ago. With that in mind, based on the motion that's referred to us, Mr. Solicitor, could you walk us through a little bit about the steps and process and how the consent decree affects what we're trying to do?
Thank you. So the process itself with the consent decree being in place, to deviate from that, specifically the topic at hand here is the method for electing the mayor. Any change to that would require a modification of the consent decree, which I guess at its most basic level is you would file a motion to modify, which is also known as, you're filing a motion to grant from final relief, and you would file that in federal court. And there are certain thresholds that need to be met in terms of modifying a consent decree. I have them spelled out right here. So the first consideration, you'd have to look at federal civil procedure. And in order to modify a consent decree in federal court, in district court specifically, you would have to show that it's no longer equitable for the consent decree or whatever it is that you're trying to modify. You'd have to show to the judge that it was no longer equitable for that particular portion of the consent decree to still be there. Secondarily, the federal courts rely on a very old Supreme Court case, U.S. v. Swift and Company from 1932. And that has two specific thresholds that need to be met when modifying a consent decree. The first being that whoever is seeking the change to the consent decree must show, either in fact or in law, that the dangers once substantial have become attenuated to a shadow, such that the need for the consent decree no longer exists, or in this case, applying it strictly to how the mayor is elected. And then secondarily, the person who's seeking to modify the consent decree must show that they face undue hardship, and that they face undue hardship should the decree remain in force. So the hardship must be evoked by new and unforeseen conditions. So the hardships, they can't just be terms of the decree that were once accepted knowingly by the city. That's not enough to justify a subsequent modification. So if you do satisfy those two thresholds, you'd be able to, theoretically, a judge would be able to modify the consent decree. If that motion is successful in federal court, then we would move to a home rule petition, special legislation to amend Chapter 43, Section 97, which I think everyone's familiar with that process. We would file that with the legislature. That would go through its process, and upon approval, that would come back to the city. And then lastly, just a simple change of the city council rules, just to change Rule 1, just because it mirrors the statute, but it does specifically spell out the process for electing the mayor. And at that point, all of the sort of boxes would be checked in terms of changing the process for electing the mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Solicitor. Before I call on my colleague, again, to the public who's just tuning in, this is a discussion regarding the developing an ordinance for selection of the mayor and or vice mayor, incorporating district councilors into the language. And thank you for the presentation you just made, Mr. Solicitor. I know that my colleagues probably have the same comments and questions I have, but a couple of things stood out to me as you were explaining the process and how the consent decree came to play. It's like a few words that to me is really, lack of better words, like very, very harsh in terms of, what needs to be done to change it. And we need to show that the current process, which is part of the consent decree, thank you for turning on the microphone. The process, one of the criteria of the changes, like it's no longer equitable, and it has to be changing conditions, fact or law, such that it's dangerous, or the current system is dangerous, and an undue hardship. These are hard words for, I think, for me and some members of the public understand, but how do you do, is there like a litmus test to show how it is, it's no longer equitable, it's in danger, undue hardship? What are the criteria, what are the litmus tests to show these things? So that way it's not just concept, it's not just words on a piece of paper.
So these are subjective terms, and they're in place for a reason, and that's the role of the judge in these scenarios. This is the template that's put in front of a judge, and then it's completely within that judge's discretion to hear the case, hear the argument for whoever's putting it forward. They would take the facts before them, or as they are put forward, and then they would apply those terms. So what is to be considered no longer equitable, I can't say. The only person that could say that would be a judge. You could try to go through case law to see if there are any cases that are on point to this. You won't find a set of facts that are identical to this one, especially in how they apply terms like no longer equitable. I think you mentioned undue hardship. Those are subjective terms that the information and the facts that are provided to the judge, they have to support those terms. And it's up to the person making the argument to convince the judge that whatever it is that they're alleging is true or putting forward is true, satisfies those requirements.
Thank you. I just want to also acknowledge Councilor Robinson is joining us. He's one of the maker of the motions that we bring forward to have a discussion today. Now I turn to my colleagues, Councilor Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know when Councilor Gitchie and Robinson had put this forward, City Solicitor Williams, they had mentioned about possibility of reaching out to the plaintiff. Has that happened?
Yes, yes, it has. I sent an email communication back with the attorney who represents the plaintiffs, and it was more of an introductory sort of reconnecting type email where I said, I was instructed to reach back out to you. I don't have any direction to give you. I don't have any proposal for you that was voted on by the council, but I just generally put it back on their radar. This is something that the council is exploring now, the method for electing the mayor. I did include the process that Worcester uses. I didn't say this is exactly how we want to do it, and that may be true, but it was just a general email to say, once I get some more guidance from the council as to, once the council says this is what we want you to do, this is what we don't want you to do, then I will go back to the attorney and we would finish the second half of the conversation.
Have you received any correspondence from them at all then? Any reply?
Yeah, he replied back, said, we're more than happy to have these conversations. And, they did specifically ask that whatever the city comes back with to them, that they would appreciate as much detail as possible so that they can, make an educated sort of decision on their end. So I said once the council gives me direction on what that is to look like, I'll happily bring it back to them.
Thank you.
Councilor Scott?
Thank you. Could you just explain a little bit, I guess, the consent decree was in 2021 that we signed that? Is that, when was the year of the consent decree?
October of 2019.
2019, okay.
Yes.
So at that time, the concern was that it was a winner-take-all type of system that violated minorities' voting rights. Is Worcester under the same type of consent decree?
No, they're not.
Okay, because I've heard Worcester brought up, so I didn't know if they've actually gone to court and had this whole exact conversation under a federal decree.
Nope. So Worcester amended their charter in 1985.
So they did it voluntarily, it wasn't under court?
Yes, right. Correct.
Okay. Okay, so that's a little different than what we're under. I have concerns. I've brought them up in the meetings, and I'll say it now. I probably wouldn't have voted to send it to the ballot, I guess, after they had just negotiated a consent decree under a federal ruling. I have a concern that we will see a winner-take-all mayor time and time again. Residents from my neighborhood, when I knocked on doors, they said to me consistently, why is our neighborhood always left out? Why is certain neighborhoods always getting certain things? And I think this kind of brings it back to that if we end up with the mayor continuously from one district or two districts in a winner-take-all scenario. So those have been my concerns, why I won't support that. I understand it went to a ballot question. I don't think it really should have after, like I said, after it had just been negotiated. I think it's kind of a bad faith look. I'm not really sure why the plaintiffs would be in favor of switching from a winner-take-all system back to a winner-take-all system, away from representation in their districts, the minority districts. So those would be my concerns. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from my colleague here on the subcommittee? I also like to acknowledge Councillor Melendez also joined us in chamber. And I will open up to comments and questions by my colleagues who are also in the chamber. Councillor Robinson?
Thank you. I think when we're looking at this, there's a couple things. Worcester voluntarily, they didn't have to get threatened with a lawsuit. And so they voluntarily changed, amended the charter, and allowed the system that they currently operated in. I think the spirit behind the consent decree was providing an equal opportunity. Right now, our residents don't have an opportunity to voice who they want for a mayor. It's a ceremonial position, and you're representing the public in a ceremonial manner, pretty much. By looking at allowing the 7,000 people that said this is what they would like to see, by looking at doing this and including district councilors, there's a lot of what ifs and maybes and how abouts. Will that be something that can spur voter engagement? Because we saw the last election cycle was dismal. The results, I think we had a total of 6,000 voters came out citywide. I mean, it was horrible as far as the turnout came. Does this spur increased engagement? I mean, we could say the same thing with the 3 at-large seats, that it's unfairly represented by the neighborhoods that come out and vote routinely with the high propensity voters. But we've also seen district councilors jump into a at-large race the following cycle and top the ticket. So I think the voting demographic in the city is changing. I think by looking at opening this opportunity up, it would be a separate portion on the ballot that would include districts. So you'd have to win your seat, whatever you opt into running for, as well as win that mayor's race. So it's not really so much a winner-take-all, because you wouldn't really, you have to accomplish, successfully be voted twice, 2 different locations on that ballot as the top vote getter, whether you run district or at large, as well as the mayor. Could that spur increased engagement? None of us know. And I think with 7,000 people casting, saying this is something they would like at least to be able to do, this cycle, through you to the solicitor, what year was that put on as a non-binding vote?
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that went on in November of 21, the non-binding referendum. Mm-hmm. Yeah, November of 21.
Thank you. So we're talking potentially, if this was enacted for next year, 4 years later, I mean, the residents said this is something we'd like to see. We implemented the district system first. We've had 2 cycles of that, going on a 3rd, and now introduce this. It's a progression. I mean, and why not give it a shot? Because we're all scratching our heads how to engage, how to get more engagement, as well as if it's something the residents said they wanted. I mean, as long as it's equitable and fair to the district councilors and they have the equal opportunity, I don't see how those involved with the consent decree could say that we're trying to regress from any stance that we took, because it's about providing equal opportunity for the residents first and foremost, and then anyone that decides to run for an elected seat would also have that equal opportunity, including the districts. I mean, my district, for example, for many years, I think there's only been 2 councilors that came from my district. I think I'm the 3rd. And so would that be something that would increase engagement in a district like that? Yet to be determined. Thank you.
Councilor Kishier?
Thank you, Chairman Chow. I don't disagree with Councilor Scott saying it could be a winner-take-all system, but I just don't know who the winner would be. Like Mayor Rourke had said, if you're already the mayor and you have an opportunity to run, you would have an unfair disadvantage at the outcome. And you could be from a small district, so that would give you the unfair disadvantage. I don't disagree one way or the other. I don't know the answer. I think we're just kind of pulling at strings right now to see, okay, and you very well could be right. I don't know the answer. But what I would say is that why not just invite the plaintiff and the attorneys here and say, okay, let's sit down and see. I mean, through you, Mr. Chairman, to the city solicitor, could you outline, and I know how this works, but just for people to understand how something becomes put on a ballot as a non-binding referendum, and how somebody gets that even to that stage? Because that took a lot of work also.
Mr. Solicitor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so that's governed by Mass General Law, Chapter 53, Section 18A. And when you have a non-binding referendum, there's a minimum amount of signatures that have to come in from the public. They bring it forward to the council. I don't know that number off the top of my head. It might be 10, it might be 20 vote. It's a low number. But either way, that gets brought forward, and then it goes to the council, and then the council will make the decision to put it on as a non-binding referendum question for a ballot.
Thank you. I just think that there's a lot of work that went in this, and I don't see anybody up here as having, like, or anybody in the audience here have an outcome that they want to see. I just think it comes down to, and I think there's some valid questions, but people have to ask to be put on for the mayor piece, if that's what we choose to do, is, okay, if you got elected, you would be in this slot and you would have to vote for that person, like the Worcester model, or whatever way it would end up being. But I just think it's fair that the people at least have some point say in this. And if it can't be done, it just can't be done. But let's investigate further and see where is the holdup. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But I don't think we're wasting our time, because a lot of people are interested in this. And it may even bring people more interested in voting. And it may help every one of us at some point. So I just think that at this stage, why not just invite the plaintiffs and their attorney here and say, okay, is this something that you would even entertain? If they wouldn't entertain it, then let's move by it. And just say, look, you know what, we're at a stalemate, let's just move by it, that's all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your time.
Councilor Dakota, and then Councilor Scott. Councilor Dakota?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to go back to what Councilor Robinson said, and I understand what his intent is that to spur more people to vote. And, you know, at this point, we're not doing a very good job of that. And how do we do that? And so I understand and I respect that. My question is, and I don't have the information in front of me, maybe I wish we had the elections director here, but it was 7,000 people that voted. Councilor Gitche, you probably would know this. How many were from the Belvedere section of Lowell, of those 7,000 votes? And I'm sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I don't have that information.
I mean, I would agree that the higher percentage would be coming from that neighborhood,
Right.
but there are a lot of blank votes also in there. So there's more of a point than one person going out and just hitting one thing. There's a lot of blanks that go along. So just because somebody goes to the ballot and votes for John Dakota doesn't mean they're going to put something for the mayor no matter who it is.
No,
So
I
it's,
understand.
I understand
your
what
point.
you're saying is that, and, you know, the same point may be that, say, Councilor Scott wants to be the mayor, and she can get people out, and they may not even vote for anything but just Councilor Scott as mayor. So right now, there's a lot of moving pieces that we all don't see in elections that can come together to push somebody over. So I don't know that the highest propensity will come from that area for that one person selection type of vote.
District, right.
So I don't think the objective would be that just because you went out and voted for, say, Council Belanger in Belvedere, that you would automatically go over if Council Belanger wasn't on the mayor's list and pick someone from there. So just because someone's at the ballot box doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be in favor of anything on the ballot. And we see a lot of that.
Valid points. My concern, once again, is the last 60 years. That's been, you know, how long has it been?
No,
since
the
we've done
Highlands
that?
used to be the one for many years, and
then
right now,
Belvedere.
when you're watching Pawtuckaville starting to go up that way too. So when you're starting to watch the numbers right now, it's back and forth Highlands, Belvedere, back and forth, and then you're watching, you know, right now, if you look at the numbers, Pawtuckaville's starting to move that way. So it's because as those numbers lower in other areas,
Well, obviously, the demographics of, you know, since we're starting to get more affordable housing, I'm sure that demographic's going to change. So I'm not against having further discussion on this. I really not. For what I gathered so far, I mean, I would not be in favor of it, but I'm not saying that's a definitive no at this point. I'm looking at, you know, the way Councilor Robinson's looking at it. How do we get more people to vote, you know? And it seems like it's just that number of people, and it's the same percentage of people in each of the districts. And that's been like that for 3 terms. I know that, Councilor Getchier. So how do we change it? How do we get to that point? And, you know, here we are going through all this judicial rigmarole here, and but, you know, if there's a way to get more voters, Councilor Robinson, I fully agree with you on that point. I just wouldn't want to see a mayor be voted in from the same district for the next 30 years, you know, that type of thing. You know what I'm saying?
you could also put something in the piece that says you can only be elected maybe one term, and then, you know, you have to be absent for a term before you could do it again. There's a
Well,
lot
could it
of
be-
modifications that could happen.
It could still be the same district, though, right?
No, because if, like, say, John Dakota is the person from that district and has
Yeah.
been there 5 years and is going to run another 5, that means
Right.
only one out of those 5 he could be
Yeah,
in there.
all right.
You know, so I think there's a lot to discuss. I think this is like the lowest level, and I think the easiest part right now is just talk to the plaintiffs and the attorney and see, are they going to push back? Is this something that, because maybe they do, maybe they don't. I don't disagree with anybody by saying that, but I just think we have an obligation just to seek information and see where we're going with it at the end, that's all.
Once again, if it's to spur more voters, I'm definitely for it. I haven't heard anybody else come up with any other ideas on how to get more people to vote. It just seems that we're stagnant right now in the number of voters that are voting, so I'd be willing to have more discussion as well.
That's the Councilor Dakota. Councilor Scott.
Thank you. I guess I would just add, I mean, I ran 2 at-large elections in the city before we went to districts. We had people standing at the Riley School door and the Daley Middle School door. And I mean, those were the 2 results that you wanted to come through in your favor to win this election. I understand you're a Highlands, counselor. You were talking about moving up top, to the top. I mean, it helps. And I also think that, Pawtuckaville 6-3 was the one after that. I mean, everyone knew the districts that were kind of, throwing the big numbers. And I think that's something I don't really think works in favor of some districts, I don't think. I also think there were people, and I know you don't want to hear that maybe, they didn't know what they were voting for. People don't want to say that. But I heard a lot of people that thought they were voting for a strong mayor when they did that ballot question. I know back when the Cawley debate was going on, everyone talked about, whether or not the ballot question was, very absolutely clear to people. And I think there were a lot of people that that want a strong mayor in the city. So I'm not sure just using that ballot question as the reasoning to move forward is also a valid thing. So it's a good discussion, though, and I appreciate it. I, of course, like Councilor Robinson, bringing people out to vote, that is very important, but I like our current system, and that's the way I want to keep it, so thank you.
I also would like to acknowledge Councilor Mercia is also in the chamber. Councilor Robinson, you have a question or comment?
Yes. So the thought of inviting in the litigants or representatives of the litigants, I think that's a good starting point, but I think there has to be something that we're presenting to them. I think there'd have to be something to at least start the conversation and say, this is what we're thinking. Because as we heard the solicitor say, basically it was left on the phone conversation that if he's instructed to have something at least, because I mean, right now he's just basically asking, would you be open to the idea? And they said, yeah, I'm not against it, but please, provide us with as much information as possible so we can make an informed decision. I think that's a valid question. So I mean, to try to come up with something that he could at least run by them to start the conversation, I think would be a starting point. I also think if you just look at it, with most elections, especially, we saw it with the national. If people care about something on the ballot, they're going to come out and vote. The mayor, it's a ceremonial position. That could be something that a lot of the residents care about. They want to see whoever they think would be a good mayor, so it might give the people a means or a reason to go out and vote. Some people that might not have voted otherwise, they might say, hey, you know what? I think Councilor Scott would be a great mayor. I'll come out and vote for her. Or if not, they might not have voted, especially if it was a district candidate and the people don't live in that district. They didn't have the option to vote for that person. So there is some of that, I think, that could come into play as well, that it could bring people out that normally wouldn't vote for a candidate that they couldn't vote for, especially with the districts being involved. Thanks.
If any of other councilors in the chamber have question or comment, please let me know. I do want to circle back to the solicitor with a question as well, because I heard it in the beginning of conversations over and again about the non-binding referendum. And for clarity, Mr. Solicitor, I know you were not here yet at that time, but it sounds to me that there was a consent decree, and then there was a non-binding referendum, like a ballot. That was after the consent decree. To my knowledge, my memory, I don't remember there was kind of discussion like this to figure out, was that acceptable, was that legal, was that even valid? But then now we're talking about, does that make sense to you? I mean, why was that on the ballot if we had a consent decree in place at that time? And like Councilor Gishop mentioned, a lot of people work hard to get on the ballot. By the same token, the plaintiff worked for years, if not decades, try to make the election system, the hybrid system we have now, to be more equitable, to make it fair, to make it open, to have more civic engagement across the city. If you look at all these things, then you have, after the consent decree was in place, then you have that question on the ballot. Like sitting right now, as of today, that doesn't sound like it made sense to me now, but it's easy to look backward and review that. Do you know what happened? How come it got on the ballot, and what does that mean? Was it valid? Was it legal? Or?
Thank you. Looking at it now, it's easy for me to say that it doesn't make sense, but I wasn't here then. There could have been a number of different reasons why that was on there, and I can't speak to any of them. Yes, it was done well after the consent decree, but there could have been good reason for that. I can't speak to that. In terms of it being legal, it was non-binding. So at the end of the day, no matter what direction the vote went, the city wasn't in a position where they were going to have to do anything. So I honestly can't speak to if anyone was confused by it or why it was done. I'm sure there was a reason why it was done at the time. I just don't know what it was because I wasn't here.
Councilor Scott?
Thank you. So as far as going forward with yeah, which I'm not in favor of, but as far as going forward with a proposal to the plaintiffs or what we're looking to outline to them, those items would have to meet what the federal court would be looking for as far as, I mean, like, I guess what would be our argument, I guess, to the court to overturn this, because that would have to be the argument we would have to be bringing forward to the plaintiffs, I would think, explaining why this is equitable. I mean, I guess what would your argument be to make in favor of doing this?
I have thought about that quite a bit. I don't know exactly what my argument would be at this time. I think no matter what, if this is to go forward, the starting point, it would have to be, in my opinion, best case scenario is getting on the same page with the plaintiff's attorneys and having those conversations. And if we were to get to a point they were comfortable, we were comfortable, then we would, there's two different directions. There's the thresholds that we would have to meet for the judge to modify the consent decree. And while it's not something that is procedural or something that's statutory, but it would be helpful to have the assent of the other side in moving forward. That's not enough for a judge to modify the consent decree, but in a scenario where perhaps we put forward an argument and it's close, the judge is looking at it and saying, well, is it no longer equitable? Maybe, maybe not. Is there undue hardship? Maybe, maybe not. But the plaintiffs in this case are in support of it. Perhaps that is what gets it over the hurdle. But ultimately, the argument that we would have to make, that's still going to be a work in progress, establishing, what's an undue hardship, why it's no longer equitable. And that's something we can, if it is the will of the body, we would work on. But right now, it's not, unfortunately, as black and white as that.
And I don't want to open, I guess, Pandora's box, but I guess I just want to ask a few questions about this. So if we're going to a federal judge to try to modify the consent decree, this is kind of a one-shot type of deal, I would think, if they're even going to be okay with doing that. Would it be something, I guess, how long would that take? What timeline? I know, we're 2-year terms on the council. Are there other changes that would want to be made at the same time? I mean, I don't know if that's like a type of further discussion to have before we went forward with doing something like that. That would just be something I'm thinking of.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Dakota?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I do want to go back to what you had stated here, because I don't want to jump ahead here, is that the only way we can do this and bring this to the Supreme Court is if both of the arguments that you had stated had to be met, and if they're not, then the Supreme Court's not even going to look at this, even though the plaintiff will give the go-ahead. Is that true?
So, yeah, just to clarify, it would actually be district court, but federal court, not. Hopefully one day I'll be in front of the Supreme Court, but until then, district court at the federal level will have to do.
I just always wanted to be a judge. I'm sorry.
Sure. True. So, correct. In order for a judge to modify the consent decree, we would have to be successful in meeting the thresholds in the argument. Right. If we are able to satisfy that, at the end of the day, and this isn't malicious in me saying this, it doesn't matter if the plaintiffs agree or don't agree in terms of us moving forward.
Right.
I think it's helpful. That's more practical than anything. But yes, if we fail to meet the requirements, the judge cannot modify the consent.
It's mute.
Correct.
I understand. Thank you.
Also joining us, I'd like to acknowledge Councilor Visna Nguyen and Councilor Wayne Jeunesse, who just walking in shortly. Councilor Getchia, you have a question or comment?
I do. I believe in this chamber, there's only maybe 2 councilors who were here at the time when the consent decree came forward. I think it was you, Mr. Chairman, and Councilor Mercia. And at the time, I think that, and I wasn't privy to, none of us were privy to it, but none of us were privy to the executive sessions that went on. As much as everybody wants to say that things were one way, there's only 2 people in here who were privy to it. I think it was you, right, Councilor Chow? You were on, right, at that time? You weren't either, so one person. I'm sorry, Council Chow. But Councilor Noon, yeah, I didn't see him enter the chambers, I'm sorry. But at the end of the day, I think we're muddying the water too quick. How long is it going to take? Nobody in here can answer that question. Nobody can. It's a question that is, who knows? I just think the discussion's interesting, and either way, I'm going to sleep at night either way, so it's not like it's the end-all, be-all. I just think it comes down to, this is what somebody wanted, let's see where it goes. I don't have copies of what solicitor's reading from on the two challenges. I would ask that you could pass us all a copy of that if you could, because I think that's interesting in itself. To hear it is one thing, but to be able to read it and digest it at the same time is a whole nother subject. So if we could get a copy of that, and maybe there's a way. But I would ask this board to just make a motion to invite people to another meeting and see, and give us time to read this and say, okay, what's the pros and cons to it? I think this is a very good discussion. I think that at the end, I don't believe a lot of people are happy with the outcome of the original, and that's why they voted this way right afterwards, because it really wasn't addressed. It was an asterisk at the bottom of. It wasn't like it was written in a paragraph, here's what we're going to do for the mayor, here's this and that. It was an asterisk at the bottom. So, and I think that people recognize that afterwards. So I just think it's an interesting discussion for all of us, and I think it's good for government, as Councilor Dakota said, Councilor Robinson said, and all of you have said, if this can get more people to the ballot box, then let's do it. So I do thank you and this board for even putting this together, because I think it's interesting.
Councilor Murcia?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't going to speak because I came in relatively late for the discussion, because the mayor and I was at Rogers Hall for their 40th anniversary, or I would have been here the minute this meeting started, because I think it's that important and that interesting. Personally, myself, I don't care either way, but I'm under the belief that even though I'm leaning towards one end of this, one side of this, to me, the public, the majority rules, just like Colley Stadium versus Lowell High School downtown. I did not win, but the public said Lowell High School downtown, the majority rules. That's my philosophy. It always has been, and it always will be. Having said that, I try to run my thoughts the way that I believe in that statement that I just said. So I thought, correct me if I'm wrong, that the public went to the polls to vote, and they voted, the majority ruled that they wanted the public to vote for the mayor. Am I right? But it was a non-binding issue. So is that right? Did you remember that? Okay. Isn't that telling us something? So personally, I don't care which way we do it, but I do know pros and cons, and that's what I'm trying to tell you. Let's go back to the consent decree, and let's go back to the public. I don't know whether 13 people had filed a grievance with the federal government and formed a consent decree to say that they wanted a fair government. They wanted to take 9 people that represented the city as a whole and make districts. And having said that, I kind of was not leaning to that. But now that I have it, I think it's a pretty good shot. I think it's a good deal to see people that probably,
We can clap on our microphone, Councilor.
to see people that would probably never get elected have a chance. And I tell you about, let's say, Paul Rathayem. Maybe he would have never made it, but he represents a district, and he made it. That's just an example. So when you say that it's fairer, I think it's fairer the way that it is now. And I'm kind of adapting to it, so I think it's fairer. Now, when you look at the consent decree and you see this vote about having, the people wanted this, they wanted that, I didn't see anywhere in the consent decree the way they told us to vote for the mayor or vice mayor. I didn't see that. Is it in there? It's a footnote. What does that say? So is that why we would have to go back to them to get their opinion? So if they want fairness, it isn't 11 people saying, this is the person we're going to have the mayor, and this is what we want. I think if we go by the threshold that they were saying in the overall theme of their consent decree, fairness to me would be let the people decide. I don't see how they could object to that when they're initiating and promoting fairness in the city with districts. How do they not say fairness to the people to vote for the mayor? But if that's the rules and that's a footnote that I probably overlooked, then we should go back and see what they say and keep this discussion going. This is a very interesting, this is government at its best when you talk and come to the table and try to iron something out for the fairness of the whole body, not just 11 people. This isn't my city, this is our city, this is everybody's city. So I think that that's my opinion. Thank you for letting me express it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nguyen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that a number of motions has been referred to your committee, Mr. Chairman, but there's a motion by me asking the city solicitor to reach out to the plaintiff attorney and to get back to the council. At some point, I want that report. I want that communication between the solicitor and the plaintiff attorney. Because when you reach out to the plaintiff attorney, it's not just the plaintiff attorney speaking. He will be speaking on behalf of those clients of his, the 11 people, Mr. Chairman. So go back to attorney, go back to Rita, is that the idea at the time, if I recall, that Councilor Mercy and Councilor, at the time, Elliott, filed the motion to put this in a non-binding referendum. And I was in support, I support the moving this along and putting the non-binding referendum only that everyone, district and at large, will have the opportunity to put their name for mayor. That's what I support, and I think just about all of us did that at the time. So there's the way. I'm sure there's, I haven't, I don't remember, but I know that city and town have done that. That allow both bodies, the district and the large, to put their name up for mayor. And if they can't do that, I cannot, I would not understand why the plaintiff attorney and or the plaintiff themselves objects to, this is more democratic way of electing, and by the people too. And we have 75% of the people said, I want a say in it. I know the process is not easy, Mr. Solicitor, but if and when the communication from the plaintiff attorney said, I'm good, my client good, let's start that process. Thank you.
Councillor Scott?
Thank you.
Excuse me, Councillor. Mr. Solicitor, do you have respond to that?
Just to Council Noon, to bring you sort of, I don't know, did you come a little bit late to the meeting?
I did.
That's what I thought I hadn't noticed, but so they had asked me earlier if I've reached out to the plaintiff's attorney, and I did, and had a good conversation, and I got an email response based from plaintiff's attorney just saying that they're happy to have the discussion. Their one request is that when we have this conversation, that I bring back a very detailed and specific process for how the city would like to elect the mayor. Because when I had spoken to him, I didn't have a lot to tell him at the time. It was basically, I was requested by you and the rest of the council to reach out to put this back on your radar. I did bring up how Worcester does it. I didn't say that's, this is how the city wants to do it, just a potential idea that's getting kicked around. So if at all possible, I'm more than happy to continue the conversations. I would appreciate just a game plan going forward for me to convey to the other side.
Mr. Chairman,
Councilor Nguyen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, citizens, for doing that, and I appreciate that very much. And I too would not. I don't think the plaintiff attorney would agree to the Worcester plan. I don't think they will, because just at large, running for mayor, they're not going to agree to that. We have to look at plan other city and town that allow both bodies to put their name if they so choose. So I'm glad that you reach out, and I'm glad you mentioned Worcester. I'm glad you talk about sitting down is an awesome thing, but I don't think they're going to agree with the Worcester plan. I wouldn't either. So thank you.
So
And
just one more question.
one last thing, very quickly. I forgot, in my conversation I did mention that it would be a modified, the plan would have to incorporate all districts. So just, again, so you know, I did leave that very small but large detail out.
Sorry, just one more question.
Councilor Scott?
Thanks. As far as the Worcester model goes, is Worcester planning? They are planning?
Yes.
Okay, so just making sure that they're not an elected mayor. Because I did express concern over the ballot question, that I spoke to a lot of people leaving that day. I was out there at the schools, that they thought they were voting for a strong mayor. So I don't think that was exactly clear in the ballot question. I would be more in favor of this model, I guess, if it were a strong mayor. The way we do it now, it's ceremonial. The districts do have a say in the mayor by choosing who they elect. I mean, that's, if they don't like who I choose for mayor, they can choose to vote for somebody else. So I do think the residents in each district have a say now, and that's just how I feel about it. Thank you.
Councilor Kitchia?
Thank you, Chairman Chow. And that's where I disagree, is I don't think I haven't seen it on anybody's literature, when they've ran, they say who they're going to vote for mayor. And sometimes that will deter people, as everybody in here knows. Not one person runs in this city that says, I'm going to vote for this person for mayor if elected. So it doesn't represent anybody. It represents ourselves when we come in here. And what we think our district wants, or what people want. And that's where I'm confused with the whole thing, is because realistically, we can go around and around on it, but nobody really comes out. And some of us don't even know till maybe 2 weeks before. After you're elected, you're like, okay, now what do we do? And it's probably the worst time in all of my political life that I have to make those decisions, because you get phone calls and everything else, and everybody knows, that's the hardest time. So I just think that let's just see where this goes and see if we can invite people to a conversation. I think it's fair. And I think, listening to the city solicitor, he looks at this as somewhat of a working document that's a challenge to get to the next stage. But nobody in here is saying that it's not a working document that could change. And my challenge to it is that nobody on this city council tells anybody who they're going to vote for the mayor prior to being elected. So there really is no public say in any of this. They vote for you as a person because you're very good at what you do, and I believe in the council is very good at what they do.
One comment, if you don't mind, just on that.
Councilor Scott?
Just on that point, I guess I respectfully disagree, just because if I do feel like I represent the people in my district, and if they had strong feelings about who they felt that should be the mayor and they expressed them to me, I think that would definitely play a part in my consideration. I don't feel like I'm just here, doing things for myself. So I do think the district has a say. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I personally have never had anybody ask me who I was voting for mayor when I knocked on their door. But I've never had anybody ask me that or push that to me when I knocked on their door. But
Well, I think every council probably had different experience as they campaign and canvass and so forth. Councilor Cotto?
Yeah, not to belabor the point any further. I mean, we've all made some good arguments here and had good discussion. But I really do think if we do speak with the plaintiff and they're all for it, my problem in here is I don't think we've met any of the two criteria that is needed for the federal judge to change our consent decree. I think that's where the battle needs to be won, and I don't see that at all in reading any one of these. So unless I'm saying something wrong, city solicitor, to me, I think the dialogue is good with the plaintiff. That's all fine and good, and they're all fine with it once we make, some certain change, tweaking it maybe. But once it gets to the federal level, and yet we're not meeting those two criteria, it's over. Am I correct or incorrect?
Yes, in that scenario, correct. If, once we get to that point, if the judge ultimately determines that we didn't meet the threshold, then correct, our motion would be denied.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments.
Councilor Murcia?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to ask through you to the city solicitor, Corey, what is the story with the people that filed the consent decree? Were there like 13 people?
Mr. Solicitor?
Thank you. 11.
11 people. And out of the 11, how many are left that live in the city of Lowell?
I do not know.
Well, I heard that like 6 of the 11 don't live here anymore. Isn't that amazing how 6 people can decide for us to do, but then they're gone? I mean, are we going to bring them back just to have them decide what the city of Lowell is going to do when they don't even live here? That's my problem. I don't mind someone voicing their opinion, telling me what to do here in this city, but I wish that they would at least live here so that they can be held accountable too. But anyway, I'm sorry. That's all.
Mr. Chair, just since we have 8 minutes for our meeting, I would make a motion that we schedule a meeting with the plaintiff and just to hear their thoughts. But once again, I think maybe the city council needs to come up with what city solicitor said was a game plan. So I think there's further discussions going to have to happen either through a subcommittee or full city council discussion. Your thoughts?
Mr. Solicitor?
I'm more than happy to ask the plaintiff's attorney to come for a discussion. I would be very surprised if that attorney wanted to come in here, and I'm not sure that is the appropriate venue for it. I know the plaintiff's attorney is more than happy to continue discussions, with myself. But to your point, in order for me to move forward, I'm going to need something from the council as to what I'm going to put forward and what we're going to talk about, because they were very clear that the hypotheticals, I don't want to say it's a waste of time. It's certainly not a waste of time, but they would rather sit down with, this is what the city wants, let's talk about it.
What about executive session? Do you think it's warranted to bring it there? Would they feel more comfortable not being in the spotlight?
I'm not sure that I can think of, at this point, an exemption that would apply to executive session to bring them in here. Like a reason to go into executive session, I can't think of one.
No.
So I think that might be a challenge.
From all the comments I hear from everyone here, I think it's worthwhile, as per Councilor Dakota suggested, to continue this meeting. It's important. It's very important. We're trying to change something that the consent decree that the plaintiff worked on for years, if not decades, to make the election system much more equitable, fair, and so forth. So obviously, this is not something that we can resolve in one meeting. And I do appreciate the councilors who brought this motion forward and referred to our subcommittee for discussion with the public. Per Councilor Dakota mentioned earlier, that the criteria we brought up when we began the meeting, the criteria to change this consent decree, because there's a human factor that makes this whole election system work. Is that it's fair to people across the city, and to overturn that, we need to show that it's no longer equitable. It is dangerous the way it is now. It's undue hardship. I do find that if those were the litmus test, I would find it very difficult to overcome those. But being said, I do support the motion to continue this discussion. And just one more thing, with all due respect to Councilor Mercer, even though limited number of plaintiffs in the lawsuit, they didn't just put on their names by themselves. They representing other members in the community, just like our role as city councilor, the motions to be made, our conversation, what we do, a decision we make. We're not making it on our own behalf. We are making it for community members, which they represent. So regardless whether it's one person, 100 people that work to make sure that we are more civically engaged, makes the system more fair. Obviously, it was the right process. That's why it passed. That's why this consent decree. And after working so hard, I do believe in a consent decree and, see how well it works, the hybrid system, that the district council is doing such a good job representing the district. And I think everybody's voting for whatever which way they're going to vote per this ordinance. They are voting on behalf of their district. With that said, the motion was put forth by Councilor Dakota, second by Councilor Kim Scott. All in favor say aye, opposed say no. The ayes have it. Motion is carried. Motion by Councilor Scott. Before we adjourn, Councilor Gitchia.
Could I ask, through you to the city solicitor, before the next subcommittee, that all of us be provided with the exact consent decree, so we could actually read through it, so that, I know we can get it online, but we'd rather have it from you, because it just makes more sense. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just one other second. So if the next step is to have that meeting with you and the plaintiff, then I think it's our responsibilities to come up with a game plan, because what are you going to go talk about if you don't have a game plan? Right? So I don't know, Councilor Chow, if you want to have another subcommittee with all the city councilors present and they're bringing forth, a game plan on their behalf, then other than that, then I don't see City Solicitor Williams with anything to talk about unless he has a game plan to go forward. So I would think that the next transportation subcommittee, that all the city councilors be present and coming forward with different ideas that should be brought forward. That would be my motion.
So I'm going to take, could you repeat the motion one more time, Councilor Dakota?
That the next transportation subcommittee that we have, that all city councilors be present. Rules. Oh, God.
That's all I'm saying here. Which subcommittee am I on right now?
Vesna just sent me something saying it's all right for a transportation subcommittee.
If I may, Councilor Chow, I think the proper procedure should be to have another rules subcommittee. The rules subcommittee will report to the full council. You can't have a subcommittee with 9 members. Okay, so I think that's the process.
So the motion, if it could,
Hold on, Corey, yes, sir.
Councilor.
Very quickly, you also could put a motion out in front of the full body to discuss this very topic. So you could put that on a future meeting, and then everyone would know to show up with the questions, potential suggestions, or something like that.
Could we amend to simplify, could we amend Councilor Scott's motion to continue, rather adjourn, to continue the meeting, and at the next meeting, if, our committee members here, myself, the chair, would ask the city manager to invite all the city councilors who are interested to participate in this meeting. They will do so if they wish to attend. Would that make sense, Mr. Clerk?
No.
I would do, as a solicitor recommended, you should have a rules subcommittee, the way it's set up all the time, to get the information from the solicitor about what he wants to, what the plan is, and then at that subcommittee, you report to the full council, and they take the action on it. It's just the way the process is.
Mr. Clerk, a motion by Councilor Scott, second by Councilor Dakota. All in favor say aye, opposed say no. The ayes have it. Motion is carried. Motion to adjourn by Councilor Dakota, second by Councilor Scott. All in favor say aye, opposed say no. The ayes have it. Motion is adjourned.